So I'm Marcos Christodonte II, as you just heard. So I'm the global CISO here at CDW. I've got a diverse background, as you see, working across a number of different industries. And part of my talk today, we're going to go through what are 3 cyber risk scenarios to help you prepare for the future of cyber risk. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Buck. He's going to introduce himself and really just talk you through what he's seeing in the industry. Buck.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for staying. AI, Dallas Cowboys, cyber. I appreciate everybody staying in here. Hopefully we got a good presentation for you today. So my name is Buck Bell. I head up the Global Security Strategy Office at CDW, and we focus on exactly what it sounds like, how our customers are trying to face the challenges every day around cybersecurity and cyber risk, and how we can provide advisory services. Or just sit and have a chat about that and see how we find a good path together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about risk in general, why it's gotten more important in the marketplace, and then kind of set up for Marcos to talk in more detail. But before I click over to this next slide, this isn't a formal poll, just show of hands. How many folks in here have either purchased technology, implemented technology, been part of a team to consider technology in the last, say, year within your own organizations? That's almost everybody, right? Well, here's the challenge. We have bought a ton of stuff over the last 10 years in particular. We bought a ton of it. We've bought it. We've acquired it. We work with partners who provide technology services to us. We are providing technology services to our partner communities. And through all of that, all of the promises some of that has brought, we're still getting cyber events, right? And so the cost of the events continues to increase. The number of events typically increases, and the events themselves have now become highly monetized, so the threat actors have a strong incentive to try to stay ahead of the game all the time. Well, that's kind of the way it is, right? I mean, I'd love to say we can just flip a switch and protect against every risk that's out there, but that just hasn't proven to be true. So the real question sometimes is, despite the fact that we bought all these widgets, we bought all this technology, are we really protecting the things that are most valuable to our company? That's a fair question to ask. Sometimes we can get bogged down in specific project needs. Sometimes we have our own internal metrics about what success is going to look like. But ultimately, are we meeting the needs of security as it relates to the most valuable assets that our business holds? More often than not, this is contained in data of some kind. So that leads you to the question of how do we figure out what is in fact the most valuable asset to our business? And I think if you're in security, you've seen, particularly over the last 5-6 years, a much stronger alignment between, like you see on the slide here, the security components with the compliance needs. We'll spend a little more time on that in a second. The need to innovate and be agile at the same time, being able to move quickly. We all know, if you've been in security for a long time, 20 years ago, the ha-ha-ha joke was, security is always the gatekeeper, right? We're always the no folks. And I can't believe I'm looking out here. Usually when you're talking to an audience that's concerned about security, there's a lot of this. Show me, right? That kind of stuff. But I don't see that much today, so maybe we're seeing a real change here. Today, we know that security, it's not positioning, it is an enabler. Trying to take this stuff to market, the services that we may provide as an organization, in an unsecure environment creates too much risk for our own company, but also, in many cases, for our customers who are counting on us to maintain their data integrity as well. So the convergence of business priorities and security priorities has never been greater than it is today. Something that's really kind of spurred this as well is the regulatory environment, the compliance side of the house. We just heard a second ago on the Cowboys side how some of that's coming into play. So for a long time, folks kind of looked at 2 things here because of the way that the regulations were crafted. Identity management, IAM on there that you see, was a big topic. And then, of course, zero trust came along, and folks were like, okay, well, this is a good model for me to try to figure out what the architecture will look like, but also some principles to follow, a way to orchestrate things. And you started to see really super similar language. It didn't matter if it was PCI or SOX or CCPA or HIPAA or whatever it may be. The language was very similar around data privacy principally, but there were a lot of things that you just go, gosh, I think I just read this in the last regulation. That started to change a little bit with the SEC cyber rules. Now, the draft version of the cyber rules was pretty toothy. I mean, when you read that thing, you're like, holy cow, they're going to start naming members of the board of directors in public filings and saying this person has cybersecurity experience. Yikes. Like, you don't want to have a large public breach if that's the case. Well, in the final analysis, after that draft was released, a lot of the public commentary against that draft was, hey, SEC, what are you guys about? Are you really a proxy for trying to improve cybersecurity, or are you about disclosure? Like, what's your actual mission? And they kind of went, okay, you're right. We're more about disclosure. And so they backed off maybe a little bit where the draft was. But what didn't change is the idea of timeliness of reporting. So can you identify that you've had a material event that impacts the company? What the heck is a material event? How do you describe that? Number one. Two, can you disclose it in a timely fashion? And then three, what is the unique responsibilities for the board of directors, the management, the stakeholders, and the folks that are performing internally against that? The SEC cyber rules definitely have a different view of risk than you've seen in some of the other regulations. So this is kind of the evolution that we've seen. This widgetism, which used to secure data for us, now the following questions are being asked, right? Is cyber investment aligned with the enterprise risk management strategy? That sounds like we have to talk to other people in the org, right? Okay, well, that's good news, hopefully. Are we prioritizing the investments? How do we rack and stack what's most important? Do we have enough cyber insurance to cover potential exposure? Heck, I talk to clients all the time who say, should we self-insure? Should we be leveraging cyber insurance any longer? Or if so, how? And are we allocating that investment to maximize the return from a risk management perspective and minimize the exposure of our data? So as I mentioned a second ago, what that's led to is this, especially in public companies, this sort of interesting and virtuous cycle, which has brought a lot of visibility of cybersecurity and risk to the topmost levels of the organization. You have shareholders in the case of a public company, or stakeholders in private companies, nonprofits, et cetera. You have boards of directors who represent the owners, and then you have management, which it falls on guys like Marcos, but also which then trickles down to the rest of the organization. And so this virtuous cycle, which is this idea of demonstrating loyalty and taking a standard of care to protect the digital assets, in most cases, the digital assets of customers, but really of the business, so that you can, again, describe what a material event might be. These three folks have suddenly become super interested. They don't talk the language of bits and bytes, most generally. They talk the language of risk, and that's why it becomes so important to be kind of conversant in that. So the solution that we're seeing is, we've historically looked at, say, CIS 18 or some of the NIST capabilities that are out there and tried to benchmark our maturity against a framework. Well, that's an interesting approach to take. It's valuable. We all do it. There are checkboxes that we go through, but also there's interesting information to glean. But then you got to look back and say, how does that map back to the real business priorities, right? Well, one way that we can try to solve for that is through risk quantification. So if we're able to present the business with a compelling story as to a dollar figure associated with the risk that may be out there. Hey, if this risk turns into an actual event, these are the dollars that are at risk. Now we're talking a more powerful notion. We can either accept that risk, we can maybe try to lay off some of that risk via cyber insurance, or ultimately, we can invest to remediate it. But we have to have something to look at. We have to have what's the rack and stack here, right? How do we look at what's the most important elements against which we can protect? So that gives us the ability then to look and make more business-aligned recommendations to senior leadership. There's a word that I'm going to throw to you all. You may have heard of this word. That's funding. We all are trying to get funding to do the things that we want to do. This is one way to try to get there, right, is to have that risk quantification exercise and then take a look at ways of aligning that back to the business. So without going any further on that, Marcos is going to pick up these topics and kind of run forward the scenarios he described. We have some live polling. And so here's the first question. And this, by the way, you can do in the app. Have you used risk quantification to communicate value and priority to executive teams or to the board of directors? Simple yes or no, right? And I think as folks begin putting responses, we'll get a little bit of a pop-up here that shows some results. Don't disappoint me. Get in there. Let's hear it. Okay, so 61% have used risk quantification. Now, if we really dove into this, I would ask you what information you were using to demonstrate that to management or the board. But that's good news, right? That's definitively good news. And the next question is, given the escalation of cyber attacks that we've seen, do you feel prepared for the future of cyber risk? Now, there's the answer you want to say, and then there's the real answer. This is a bit of a loaded question. Please do answer, but we know that everybody has concerns at bare minimum. So, okay, well, everybody was honest. Thank you for that. So I'm now going to turn it over to Marcos to dive in a little bit more.
Thank you, Buck. Excellent. So as I mentioned, today I'm going to cover really the evolving cyber risk landscape. We're going to dive into the potential future of cyber risk, and then I'm going to close with 3 theories from a cyber risk perspective for you all to kind of take back and consider in your organizations today. So the first, I would say, as we all know, change is inevitable. It's all around us. And with innovation comes new change. We've got new technologies. We've got all sorts of things that we need to consider. Think about AI for a moment. We've heard quite a bit about AI. Quick question. Raise your hand if you've learned more about AI over the last 6 months than over the last 3 years. I expected everyone but Sanjay to raise his hand. I'm in that boat as well, for sure. And so we're in a world where the pace of change continues to accelerate. And with it, we're seeing cyber risk accelerate as well. I like to say, as the pace of change accelerates, cyber risk proliferates. So let's unpack that. So most organizations today, many of you all in this room, are undergoing some form of digital transformation, whether it's migrating to the cloud, whether it's consolidating technologies, whether it's reevaluating your business processes and applications such that you can continue to chart forward on your digital transformational journeys. However, with each change, each evolution of technology, we have more cyber risks that we have to confront. Now, in parallel with every new technology change, we also see new regulations that are prompting. We've heard Buck talk a little bit about the SEC cyber rules. Those continue to, if you're a publicly traded company, provide more requirements from you from a disclosure perspective. And while compliance is important, we recognize that, compliance doesn't address all the different risk scenarios that are out there. It doesn't address all the different threat vectors that are out there. But we know to expect new regulations. We know to expect new compliance requirements. And while those mandates increase, we see more cyber threats increasing as well. They're growing in numbers, more cyber threat actors that we have to contend with. They're becoming more clever, more persistent. We're also seeing these threat actors, they lack empathy. They lack compassion. You've probably seen in the news recently, a cyber threat actor targeted the Save the Children Foundation. If you're not familiar with Save the Children, they're a humanitarian aid organization that they provide support for children that are in need. That's the type of threat actor that we're up against. That's the type of adversaries that we're up against today. So if they have no compassion for Save the Children, you can only imagine they don't have any compassion for us as well. So you might ask yourself, how do we address this proliferation of cyber risks? What does the future hold? Before we take a look forward into the future, I want to take a step back and look back. So over the years, we've seen an evolution across these various different risk dimensions. How many of you all remember when GDPR was released? This is a game changer from a compliance perspective. You've got compliance penalties upwards of 20 million or 4% of revenue. We also seen, from a threat perspective, NotPetya in 2017 destroying systems in over 60 different countries. We also in that period saw that the cloud continued to take off. This is when AWS turned a profit for the first time. Then if we look forward a little bit more, in the next period, we saw many of the same cyber threats that we saw from the prior period, but there was a significant shift. A shift in the threat actor, a shift in the threat adversaries, where we saw with the SolarWinds breach. We saw the use of code implants to taint your supply chain. This effectively given these threat actors the ability to compromise one company to then get access to all of their customers, multiple victim companies. So SolarWinds was a good example of that. Kaseya as well in 2021. We also saw the growth of cloud computing continue to expand. We saw the use of containers becoming more widespread, the use of infrastructure as code as well. And now in the current period, so if we look at what we're seeing today, we're seeing multi-extortion attempts from threat actors. So they're not just looking at deploying ransomware, but they also want to steal your data. Such that if you don't pay that ransom, they're going to threaten you, they're going to harass your executives. They might decide they want to sell that information or launch distributed denial of service attacks against your organization. Similarly, on the compliance front, as we just described, the SEC cyber rules require new disclosure requirements. Additionally, across all your different industries and geographies, whether you are processing payment credit card information, you've got PCI DSS 4.0 with the new requirements that you need to meet. If you're a government contractor, you now have the CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, that you have to ensure that you meet and adhere to as well. And then on the digital transformation front, we've talked a lot about AI, right? Generative AI has exploded recently, as has the use of no-code and low-code from an application development perspective. So given these trends, you might ask yourself, what does the future hold? We know that technology will continue to advance, technology will continue to accelerate pace, so what should we expect next? And frankly, what should we do about it? So those are the questions I want to explore with you all today. So first, will AI-powered cyber threats expose those basic cyber hygiene issues? We know that compliance, we know that companies tend to struggle with addressing some of the basics that are out there. Whether it's a missing patch, whether it's a misconfiguration, whether it's weak authentication. Will AI further expose these issues, but potentially at scale and at the speed of an API call? We hear about quantum computing, and quantum computing continue to surface. Will it break the modern encryption that we all rely upon, the encryption that's pervasively used in our applications and our systems? Or will systemic cyber risks evolve to more widespread business risks, widespread existential business risks? You may have seen some small companies, even some universities, they had to close their business due to a cyber attack, or that's what they noted. So will cyber risk become so detrimental, so impactful across different industries, across different businesses, that it leads to an existential crisis? Perhaps for larger corporations, perhaps across industries, maybe our financial system. Or will we see these other risks? Perhaps more code implants, supply chain issues, IoT, I heard someone mention IoT earlier, 5G. Well, the truth is, we do know that we can expect to see cyber threats and cyber risks across all of these different vectors over the years. But the key for us is to start thinking about it, to start thinking about what we need to do about it. So what can we do now? What should you all do now as we prepare for the future of cyber risks? Now, contrary to what you might read in the news or hear in the industry, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's out there. I do believe that managing cyber risks is a tractable problem, something that we can contend with. So what I'm introducing today are 3 cyber risk theories, and backing those up with some practical actions you can take back to strengthen your cyber readiness and resilience, to help better optimize costs. We know that we've been dealing with the macroeconomic conditions for several years now. And third, to gain better business alignment. That's something that's going to be key. I heard someone talking about budgets earlier. So let's jump in. So theory number 1 is what I call the systemic cyber risk disruption theory. So this theory suggests that systemic cyber risk is disrupted through the careful and consistent focus on limiting the reach of future cyber incidents. So that's the key there. We want to limit the reach of future cyber incidents. So under this theory, the first action, as you see here, is to reduce the avenues of potential attack. When you think about it, the more avenues that a threat actor has to get access to your environment, to get access to your system, the easier it will be for them to find some of those exposures. Right? So one of the best ways that you can attack this problem is think about identifying classes of potential attack points to remove. We hear about VPN, and as we know, we log into VPN, we tend to get access to everything. Consider removing VPN and replacing it with single application access. You might hear from a solution provider perspective, they call this private access. Additionally, passwords are becoming a big challenge for our industry. Consider removing passwords and replacing them with passwordless, phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication. That's going to be key. Additionally, we tend to have a lot of legacy systems. Sometimes those legacy systems are required from a business perspective, perhaps still supporting legacy processes and different functions. But consider where you can reduce those lingering legacy systems from operating and essentially decommission them altogether. The last thing I'll say on this one is standardization is also very critical. You want to standardize on secure design patterns. Perhaps it's looking at common and secure data egress points. Perhaps it's common and secure login methods. When you define these particular secure patterns, you want to make sure you enforce them, and then you want to continuously test them over time. Identify deviations that you want to make sure you're able to resolve as well. Now, I would say oftentimes removing classes of attack points and standardization may not be within your ability to control directly. When you think about, as I mentioned, those legacy systems, if you've got business processes that are relying upon these systems, removing them tomorrow may not be something that's feasible. So the second action focuses on removing the non-essential interconnections. Consider here, as you think about your ecosystems, do you have third-party integrations that perhaps are no longer needed? Over time, as you continue to build on top of applications and you start to build out integrations with your database systems, are those database integrations still required? All those different database connection points. And consider whether or not your crown jewel systems actually need internet access. Is that a mechanism where you can remove that potential interconnection? And finally, the third action is to minimize concentration risk. You might find concentration risk in a variety of different locations. At the lowest level, it might be within a few administrator accounts. Consider if you've got a few accounts that might have the keys to your kingdom. Is that risk concentrated within those particular accounts, perhaps in a way that's given those particular accounts access to everything in your network, everything in your environment? And as consolidation continues to increase, and as we adopt more platforms as opposed to point solutions, which I think I heard thematically today as well, consider how deeply concentrated your risk is becoming in those monolithic platforms. Additionally, you might find concentration risks within your third parties. Could be your third-party vendors, could be your third parties that are providing staff augmentation. Depending upon how deeply entrenched they are, they might be providing some form of concentration risk as well. And so I would say, as you consider concentration risks, while we might not be able to fully minimize it or eliminate it, consider how to manage it, because that's going to be the key as you move forward. Okay, so the second theory here is what I call the business language blending theory. So this theory suggests that by blending cyber business risk language with the business language, you're going to garner more support, going back to the resources point, Buck, more support and resources for your security programs. And I'm going to dive into this a little bit more, but ultimately the focus here is really on communication. In addition to improving security, you want to find opportunities to deliver business value in addition to security value, and specifically find opportunities to articulate that business value in ways that are understandable by the business. I'm going to talk about passwords a bit again. I'm a big fan of moving away from them. When you consider moving away from passwords, it's definitely providing quite a bit of security value, but it's also providing a lot of business value as well. You're reducing friction for your employees, for your coworkers, for your third parties that might have access to your systems. And that friction is ultimately going to save them time and increase productivity, which is also a business benefit. And the second and third actions here are focused on aligning security activities and terms to those that the business uses. We've got to get away from using security speak, if you will. So the goal here is really to help the business understand that robust cyber risk program that you're managing, it's helping to enable the business perhaps from a sales perspective. Maybe it's reducing the friction from that sales process, saving time when it comes to landing deals, maybe providing additional confidence and trust with your prospects as well. So you want to be able to convey that. And then back that up with concrete examples. Show them how that security program, those security processes are contributing to sales revenue. measure that and help report that out. Ultimately, that then leads to the security risk program not just seen as a cost center or a support function. And finally, theory number 3 is what I call the cyber efficiency innovation theory. So this theory suggests that by optimizing existing resources, you have an equal or greater chance of providing more value than procuring a new solution. This is actually a little bit controversial. I'm going to say that again. You have an equal or greater chance of providing more value than procuring a new solution. So consider here the first action, which is to maximize the outcomes of your current investments. If you think about your current technology stacks, if you think about your current security stacks, you may not have full coverage. You may not have leveraged all the features and functions. Consider, have you turned them all on? Are they properly tuned? Are they properly managed? Are they properly monitored? Have you fully leveraged the integrations across those different systems that you have, across those different platforms, in such a way that you've got data from one system that's then informing another system or application and leading to a situation where you've got 1 + 1 = 3. So you're compounding that value, essentially. And so the next action here is to consider, have you fully utilized your native system capabilities? If it's native, you're likely already paying for it in some form or fashion, right? Have you turned on advanced system logging? Or perhaps are you relying upon a third-party tool to provide you all the logs? Sometimes you might find that those third-party tools might not have all the logs you need during an investigation. So that's something to consider. Have you leveraged your native firewall capabilities to provide solutions such as microsegmentation, further giving you the ability to reduce those system interconnections that I talked about? And finally, the last action, which I consider to be the most important, is to automate the basics. It's no secret, security, we often have a lot to contend with, and a lot of organizations do struggle with addressing those basic security needs, and so, which results often in a basic security failure, whether that's that missing patch, MFA bypass, we see quite a bit of that, or a missing agent on a workstation. So automation can ensure enforcement, automation can ensure configuration persistence, it can provide self-healing in case those controls stop working, in case they decay or entropy over time. And automation can help to provide self-patching, self-healing through rehydration of systems. So with that, my call to action to you is to really evaluate these theories. Think about how they might apply in your organization. And as the pace of change accelerates, use these theories to slow the proliferation of cyber risks across your organization. Thank you. I think we've got time for some questions.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. So I love that layout that you've put together with, that matrix of threats and compliance and transformation, because, having those frameworks really helps with the ultimate goal, which is that communication piece, right? Like, ultimately, we're talking about communication of risk, right? And getting away from that, security speak. So to that end, folks are asking, and this applies to all the rest of the conference, the slide decks will be available in the mobile app at the end of the conference. So stay tuned for all of those. I know folks will probably want to utilize these decks as well. So I guess, and I'll remind everyone, keep asking questions in the mobile app or raise your hands. All of you can speak up. We've got mics. So I want to just start off by asking, the tech execs that I worked with a lot of the time had this impossible role of having to, go to the board and talk both about innovation and about the risk. And, having to play that dual role is nearly impossible, right? So how does that, these tools are going to be part of that conversation, right? So how do you think about, when you literally go to the board, Marcos?
Yeah, it's One, I would say it's important to understand who your board members are.
Yes.
To understand their backgrounds. I like to do quite a bit of homework. Because in some boards, and I would say CDW boards are a little bit unique, we have great engagement by all of our board members, but I've seen a lot of boards where you typically just have one or two board members that are engaged in asking the tough security questions. So I think it's important really to understand who they are, what their backgrounds are. I also like to reach out to my peers if those board members are sitting on their boards as well, just to understand what are they looking for and the like. So again, it's a bit of a sort of homework and kind of research activity, but then from there, it's really understanding from a business perspective, what are we doing across our organization? What is the board typically talking about? What's on that agenda outside of that cybersecurity conversation?
Right.
And then how can I align what we're doing from a program perspective such that the conversation feels like a natural kind of board meeting, just an extension through the lens of cybersecurity. So that's what I tend to do, and what I would recommend is just sort of balancing both understanding your board members and who you are. It goes back to just understanding your audience, and then two, being able to align the programs and the conversations to the conversations that the board members are already having.
Yeah, so a lot of prep, a lot of situational awareness, I would say. Yeah, sounds right. That is, frankly, what we advised our tech leaders to do. So much of it is just in the prep work and knowing the context, right?
A lot of times as well, they may not phrase it this way, but boards are interested in operational resiliency. They want to know that they're not going to face significant downtime. This isn't a fear, uncertainty, doubt scenario, right? It's just we're doing the business of the business. And what happens if we can't do the business of the business? What are the impacts of that? And there's usually a way to articulate that's of the interest to the board.
Absolutely.
There's also a tendency to underestimate the impact of those events. I talked with a client not long ago who was bemoaning the fact that he had been told in a board meeting that the board thought there was about $1 million in total risk in the coming year from an operational disruption. And he went, oh my gosh, laid out a few things, and it was clearly a bit divorced from that. So I think, coming with evidence, doesn't have to be voluminous, but a little bit of evidence, a little bit of quantification, that can help as well.
Yeah, alleviate some of the fear when you're actually talking real numbers. That's great. So I want to hear from you. Obviously, we're talking a lot about innovation and emerging technologies. So top emerging technology that's keeping both of you up at night. Buck, do you want to start?
So this has been alluded to a couple of times already. I think we saw this first with the Log4j exploit. Something not everybody knows about that is that within its release, within 24 hours post-release of that exploit, there were 1,000 variants that had been created. That's also called a lot of variants. And so when you talk about AI, and Sanjay obviously spoke at some length on this, but to me, when I talk about cyber risk management, more often than not, it's like do what you're doing, but do it better, because the pace of the threats, I think, is accelerating. So for me, it doesn't keep me up at night, but just the idea that you don't have a lot of time post major launch or event to deal with these things. And then the other thing, just briefly, is I'd put this generally in the category of software bill of materials. You just need to know what stuff is in your stuff. So if you're using open source tools or other third-party tools, there are inherent risks that you may not have fully evaluated against that. You just need to be able to know what's there so that you can take the appropriate action at the appropriate time.
Marcos, anything keeping you up at night?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question, ultimately. I think for me, I always try to keep up with technology and what's happening. And I think what I said in the presentation kind of speaks to it, which is, as technology continues to accelerate and evolve, and as we continue to innovate, there's always more cyber risk. And so when you think about, security, we're kind of that horizontal across all platforms, all kind of business processes. And so it's always the unknown unknowns and not knowing what you might be missing. And so that, I think for me, is just trying to keep up with all the different things that are going on and how that applies to our organization as well.
Got it. There's some really good specific conversations about specific breaches, and maybe we'll save that for cocktail hour this evening. So we'll seek these guys out throughout the rest of the day. But Last question, you kind of set us up with this controversial last proposition, and I want to test it out. But it's really back to our theme here, right? This idea that we can innovate if we're building on the existing infrastructure and that existing foundation, right? So how do you actually socialize that controversial position?
Well, I think, as you think about it, oftentimes with new technology, you might not have the skill set to manage, operationalize, and evolve that platform. But if you've sort of half deployed the current solutions that you have, you already have some knowledge and some base understanding about how that platform works. And so perhaps it's again, going to platforms versus point solutions, you might then be deploying a new module on that particular platform. And so from a base platform perspective, you already have a threshold level of understanding and skill set within your current team. And so oftentimes it might be more beneficial to kind of double down there, make sure that you've really taken advantage of all the value that platform has to offer, while considering whether or not it makes sense. And so I think that's the calculus that you got to make, just based on the maturity of that particular platform or set of platforms along that tech stack in the comparison to the others that you're evaluating.
Well, and it ultimately is about risk appetite and communicating all of that, right? So, well, let's give a warm round of applause for Marcos and Buck. Thank you.